What about doctors? Can you generalize about doctors' view? Are they generally neutral on the issue of prenatal testing, or how do they normally present it to women? Does that have an effect?
It has an effect. It's increasingly, I mean, when I first started doing this, it was the genetic counselors. It's mostly done by counselors, lower paid people who will spend time talking to you. Docs don't spend long times in conversations. So it takes a half an hour or so of conversing, an hour maybe. And then it was done by lesser paid workers. And to some extent that still is the case, that it's genetic counselors. But increasingly, it's not that a woman walks in there to learn. By the time she comes in there, increasingly, she's gone through this with friends, she knows about this. It's not the information that goes on in that session. There is a sort of a formal agreement to be neutral, particularly among the genetic counselors, that they just present the information. But the way you present information, the fact of what information you choose to present, it's very hard once you have this testing to say, yeah, I would terminate this pregnancy for, I don't know, higgledy-piggledy disease, but I wouldn't terminate it for something else. So if you find higgledy-piggledy, tell me. If you find this other condition, don't tell me. That's really beyond doing, just about. I found very few people willing to work with that.
You're talking about the counselor is unwilling to work with that.
Really, they really want this, and it's so funny, it's this language of information. No, they really have to have all the information. You have to have the information. And sometimes I've talked with counselors afterwards, like a woman says, oh, I don't think I really want to know, because I wouldn't terminate the pregnancy, so I don't think I really want this information. And the counselor said, well, just get the information and then you'll decide.
Don't you think that's part of the larger medical culture too, where you're supposed to disclose everything to the patient? And that's a relatively recent occurrence.
And it's a good thing. What we have here, though, is no sort of informed refusal of information. So
informed refusal, that's a very interesting phrase.
Yes, because we talk about informed consent, and information is not inherently neutral. So to say there's some information I don't want, I mean, counselors know, like I said, I would talk to a counselor afterwards, so why did you push that woman so hard to get the information? She told you she wouldn't terminate the pregnancy. She's saying, I will not terminate this pregnancy, I'm a devout whatever, we don't do it, I'm not doing it. She said that. You say get the information anyway. She said, well, once they get the information, they change their minds. And so she really needs the information to make an informed consent. I said, did you tell her that if I give this information to 100 women who tell me they absolutely will not have an abortion, what percentage of them can't go through with that and have the abortion? Should she not have that information? So that she could say, no, 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 I know that if you told me this, I might find it too hard to continue the pregnancy, so don't tell me. That would be informed refusal of information. No. So you just keep giving people information and feeling like not to have information is to bury your head in the sand. The grown-up thing to do is to get more information. But as I say, information is not a purely neutral thing.
Explain what the difference is between directive genetic counseling and non-directive genetic counseling, and do counselors practice one way or the other?
In the U.S., non-directive counseling is overwhelmingly the dominant model.
Which means what in practice?
You don't tell the woman what to do. You decide. I will give you the information.
And yet you're just describing them deciding, though.
But not, okay? They're saying just get the information and then decide. They're not saying you have to have the test.
But they're saying
they're certainly not saying you have to have the
abortion.
abortion.
But they are saying you must have all this information. So in some ways they're being a little bit dishonest.
They don't think they're being dishonest. I don't know. It's so hard. I mean, I've worked with them. I hear their good intentions.
Of course.
And they think that women, I mean, if you see somebody who, as one counselor said, I see this woman, she is headed off a cliff. I believe she's headed off a cliff. I believe if she had more information, she would change her path. How do I not give her information? So they won't say, you are being a fool. Terminate this pregnancy. Never, ever, ever.
And
okay?
that's
some docs used to do that. In some countries they do that. They say, this is a mistake. You should terminate this pregnancy.
And that's what directive counseling
That's
is.
directive counseling. Now, in some ways, that gives the woman the position to say, no, I disagree, you're wrong. To say, no, let's get you some more information. You need to be more informed. Let's do the testing and just get the information, and not indicate how, in some ways, harmful, dangerous the information itself might be to the woman's plans. That's a kind of interesting, insidious thing, and it's so much a part of the culture. You know, You don't buy a car without doing lots and lots of research and shopping and getting all the information. How can you have a baby without getting all the information? So it's a really hard thing to talk
yet
about.
This is so recent in our culture that we could get any information about the baby
and
we're
talking
carrying.
about a generation.
Yeah, we really, it's just been one generation. So it's so interesting that now it's become so profound that how can you do this without the information?
Right.
And yet this is
It's
so recent.
so rare to find anybody who says, nope, no ultrasounds. I don't need to see any pictures of this baby because I don't want to know if there's a neural tube defect. I don't want to know what you could find with an ultrasound. It's just, it's not, and when they do that, they don't do it by huge informed consent. With that, they don't say, we're going to do an ultrasound now so that we can see if the baby has any of the fetus has any of the following conditions. There's no treatment for these conditions, but if we learn them, you will have the choice of continuing or terminating the pregnancy. Shall we do the ultrasound? Nothing like that occurs.
In fact, let's talk about ultrasound for a minute, because this is much more common than amniocentesis. In fact, you would be hard-pressed to find a single woman who hasn't had routine, several ultrasounds at least, in a pregnancy. And you have this essential, everyone's familiar with what an ultrasound looks like now. They know exactly in their mind's eye what this supposed photograph of the fetus looks like. Explain what that has done to our view of pregnancy, because here you're able to see the fetus completely separate in your mind's eye from the woman who is carrying the fetus. Talk about that.
Well, that is interesting. When I do talk, sometimes I ask people to just draw in the air, just doodle me a fetus in the air, and they do that, the big head and little curled body. And I say, now, just put your finger on where the woman's belly button would be. No idea. For one thing,
belly button woman?
Yeah, the woman would have to be standing on her head because the fetus has been turned upside down.
So it looks like
a baby.
Person.
Yeah. The image is very much of the fetus floating alone. It looks like that man in space imagery. It's tethered to this placenta, but it's free floating.
Independent.
Independent and lonely. I mean, it does have this kind of alone, vulnerable look to it, which is kind of intriguing. What you don't see is that it's as tightly held, cuddled, rocked as it'll ever be in its life, right? It's not put down, it's in there. It's hearing a heartbeat, it's being held, it's being rocked as the woman walks and moves. It's inside somebody. But the image is the free-floating, kind of alone fetus, very separate from the woman. So the woman becomes this kind of surround in which this vulnerable fetus. And so you end up with this very, very different image of pregnancy.
It is completely fascinating how all of this has completely changed our view of pregnancy, and I wish we had more time to keep on talking. I want to thank Barbara Katz Rothman for this discussion about prenatal testing. For upcoming episodes, viewer feedback, and links to important information, log on to our website at the address that appears on your screen. Thanks so much for joining us on Health Vision, a production of WOUB Public Television.